In September 2006, an E. coli 0157H7 outbreak swept through 26 states in America. 206 people became ill. 3 people, including a toddler, died.
U.S. FDA officials said the most probable cause of this outbreak is bagged fresh spinach. Natural Selection Foods, LLC, voluntarily recalled its tainted fresh spinach products. 77-year-old Marion Groff showed symptoms of infection soon after eating the spinach and died a few days later. According to Dr. David Atchison at the FDA, the outbreak is very serious and the federal government is continuing to search for the source of contamination.
The producer of the contaminated spinach, Natural Selection Foods, is located in Salinas Valley in California. Salinas Valley is known as the salad bowl of the world. Its vegetables are grown and sold all over the United States and exported to Europe and Asia. It's not hard to imagine the magnitude of impact if problems arise in vegetables grown here. Moreover, the strain of E. coli that caused the outbreak this time, E. coli 0157H7, is a deadly strain.
Generic E. coli are common bacteria which exist in animal and humans' intestines and stools. When people consume food contaminated by generic E. coli, the human body can handle it because the acid in the stomach can kill the bacteria. However, E. coli 0157H7 is different because it is highly resistive to acid and can survive in a human stomach.
E. coli 0157H7 is a pathogenic variety, and there are a number of different pathogenic varieties of E. coli, but this one's particularly bad. It's sometimes called enterohemorrhagic E. coli because it has toxins, which are really the main virulence factor that creates a lot of the problems when people get sick.
The first E. coli 0157H7 outbreak in the United States happened in 1982, caused by beef hamburgers that were not thoroughly cooked. Since then, many outbreaks have occurred around the world. It is one of the 8 newly discovered pathogens since the 1970s. Symptoms of its infection include abdominal pain and bloody diarrhea. It can also cause permanent kidney failure or even death. A few strains of E. coli 0157H7 can cause serious infection.
Media coverage of this E. coli 0157H7 outbreak was overwhelming. People are concerned and want to find out the cause so as to avoid future outbreaks. Unfortunately, 2 months later, another 2 E. coli 0157H7 outbreaks happened again. Prepackaged iceberg lettuce used by fast food chain Taco Bell was contaminated, and it affected consumers in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and South Carolina. 71 people became sick, with 9 showing a form of kidney failure known as hemolytic uremic syndrome. At the same time, bad news came out from another fast food chain, Taco John. Contaminated lettuce infected 81 customers in Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin. Although the 2 fast food chains are not connected and use different vegetable growers, the problematic lettuce all came from the Central Valley and a coastal area in California. Both are not far from Salinas Valley, the source of September's E. coli outbreak.
On November 15, 2006, at a hearing in the U.S. Senate regarding food safety and E. coli outbreaks, Dr. Kevin Riley, Deputy Director of the California Department of Health Services and Prevention Services, presented the results of the investigation into September's outbreak, which originated in Salinas Valley.
The 0157H7 was identified in fecal or water samples at or near all 4 of these locations. All 4 of these fields had E. coli 0157H7 associated with them. Only one of them, however, had the matched strain, the strain type, based on the genetic testing. To date, 10 different isolates from the environment have shown up with that same genetic testing. They come from cattle feces, wild boar feces, water specimens, and wild boar that were killed on site.
The probable field that the baby spinach came from was on a cattle ranch, so there were cattle there, and the cattle were shedding the same kind of E. coli as was causing the illnesses.
In September's outbreak, officials detected the same substrain causing the illness in a nearby cattle ranch. In the Taco John's outbreak in November, the disease-causing substrain was found in a dairy farm near the lettuce grower. In fact, since the very first recorded E. coli 0157H7 outbreak in 1982, Most of the outbreaks are linked directly or indirectly to cattle. Research shows that cattle are the major reservoir of E. coli 0157H7. And just how does the bacteria transfer from cattle to vegetables then?
Can the irrigation water be the medium?
Our spinach growers do not use surface water for irrigation. When they tested well water that was used for irrigation and they tested the soil in that field, they couldn't find that E. coli in either place. They found it in the pig feces and in the cows and in the river, but not in the soil and not in the well water.
Is the cow manure containing E. coli 0157H7 used as fertilizer?
Cattle manure is used as fertilizer, but not on fields that are growing greens.
E. coli 0157H7 was also found in pigs on the site. So what is the role of pigs in the transmission of the bacteria?
It doesn't appear that E. coli 0157 is that the pig is a definitive host. It's probably an accidental host. It looks like this bacteria probably evolved in multi-chambered stomach ruminant animals, cattle, maybe other wild ruminants. How the pigs became infected, we don't know. You can use your imagination and figure out.
Some people say it is necessary to separate cattle farms from vegetable farms to reduce the risk of contamination. But if pigs are roaming all over the place, this measure could prove to have little effect.
Since 1995, there's been more than 20 outbreaks related to E. coli 0157H7. And a number of these, probably 8 to 9 of these, have been traced back to the Salinas Valley region of California.
We don't know why the ecology of the Salinas Valley predisposes to this contamination. And it's not a unique finding. Over 2 years, we found systematic contamination of the waterways and areas in the Salinas Valley with the 0157H7. There's still a lot of science that we don't know about why this is happening.
Is that the scenario that we're at? We don't know how. We know it got contaminated, and it's likely we will never know exactly how it was contaminated.
Are there ways to eradicate such environmental contamination?
Until now, once the growers stopped using water from rivers and streams and started using well water, it was supposed that because it came from down in the ground that it was pure enough. Now, if we find that it isn't really pure enough, we may find ourselves having to disinfect water that's used for irrigation. This will be expensive. California is the leading producer of many different foods in the United States, including greens, but California has very little water. After that, I think the pigs are going to be a problem always, and that is a matter of what the public is willing to do. We could, if there is a hunting season in California now for wild pigs. People can go out and shoot them during certain times. But if the pigs are a real public health problem, maybe we, instead of saying we will hunt them for sport, we need to do some serious extermination.
If it is very hard to eliminate E. coli 0157H7 from the environment, then can the problem be solved from its source, or the cattle that host the bacteria? The first question is, why have cattle become the main source of E. coli 0157H7?
In the past 50 years, livestock and poultry production have gone through huge changes. At 6 months after birth, the cattle are sent from pasture to very crowded feedlots. Their feed is mainly grain, plus additives such as vitamins, antibiotics, protein supplements, and hormones. Cattle produced this way grow very fast, and the meat is fat, tender, and juicy. Apparently, this is what consumers like. However, when the feed changes from grass to grain, the acidity in cattle's stomach increases significantly.
We worked with generic E. coli, not specifically E. coli 0157H7. I want to make that clear. What we did is we changed cattle from a ration of high grain to forage. We made a very abrupt shift in their diet. When we did this, it reduced the E. coli population in the feces by 1,000-fold, and of the E. coli that survived, their ability to resist an acid shock similar to passage through the human stomach was also reduced a further 1,000-fold. So of the bacteria, the E. coli specifically, that could survive a passage through the human stomach, we saw a reduction, a total cumulative reduction of 1,000,000-fold of the E. coli.
Grain feed increases the acidity in cattle's multi-chamber stomach, and this leads to stronger acid resistance of generic E. coli in the ruminants. One of the main characteristics of E. coli 0157H7 is its resistance to acid. Then is it possible that the increased acidity in cattle's stomach, or the change of cattle feed, is the reason behind the vast increase of E. coli 0157H7? Maybe. However, this argument is still under debate in the scientific community. But one thing that is certain is that in New Zealand, where cattle are raised in pastures, the prevalence of E. coli 0157H7 is much lower than in the U.S., where the practice of confined feeding is the dominant way to produce cattle. Another undisputable fact is that the extremely crowded environment found in the practice of confined feeding makes it very easy for E. coli 0157H7 to spread from one cattle to another.
And they are kept very close together, so they have a good opportunity to exchange infections with E. coli 0157.
The modern practice of confined feeding is very different from the image of pastures where cattle leisurely roam about. What has led to this change? Why did cattle feed suddenly change from grass to grain, altering the methods used for thousands of years?
Yeah, confinement feeding came about after World War II, whenever we realized we had an awful lot of production capability. We could grow a lot of corn, and we started having a lot of surpluses, okay? And corn prices were really low. As it became cheaper and we had so much of it in surplus, we started to feed more and more of it to cattle. Okay, and then we realized that we could fatten cattle really fast on corn. We can take a calf from a weaning weight of about 500 pounds up to a slaughter weight of 1,100 to 1,150 pounds in about 9 months. Very fast. We slaughter these cattle between 12 and 14 months of age. Okay, so we can grow them very fast. It's very efficient. And we've got a lot of it. We've got a lot of corn. So it became a lot easier then to turn cattle feeding into an industrial process. Put a lot of cattle into one small space. Bring the corn to them. Remember, at the time, energy was cheap too. We could truck lots of corn to a feedlot. We could truck the manure away. We could truck the carcasses and the finished products to the cities. Okay, so given cheap corn, given cheap fuel, we had the ability to put tens of thousands of cattle on one piece of land and feed them for short periods of time and produce a high quality protein food for people. And it's a $78 billion industry right now, big industry, lots of interest there.
It may appear that reduced cost and increased profitability are the driving forces behind the modernization of the cattle industry. But some believe that consumers' choices also played a significant role in the modernization of agriculture. In the Food, Ethics, and Environment Conference at Princeton University in November 2006, a dairy farmer in the audience talked about his ideas on the cattle industry.
The problem is that the farmers are all locked into selling the beef that they think the industry wants to buy, which is very fat, young cows.
Bob Langert, Vice President for Corporate Social Responsibility at McDonald's, provided his version of the story.
When I get with my peers in the corporate social responsibility field, we all kind of complain and we whine. You know what we whine about? We whine because there's not enough consumer demand for all this. So I always wish, there's demand in this room, but and I know people have different viewpoints on it, but in general, we are going to be reflective of what most consumers want. We're a high volume business. We're not a niche business. We're not a small shop. So we're a place for the masses, and we're going to go for what people want.
So consumers are responsible for, what most of the things what is in the supermarket. they want it, that's what is there. For example, if the consumer wants the lean, that's what they typically want. They will produce lean meat. The information will pass through back to the farmers. And those farmers who are not willing to participate, they'll be out of the system.
In fact, the modern cattle industry is only one facet of modern agriculture. In the past few decades, people's lives have gone through dramatic changes.
As agriculture became more industrialized, we saw the same thing happening in agriculture as we see happening in other industries. In fact, agriculture became an industry. It started to morph away from family-based, community-based, locally based enterprise, okay, into more of an industry to produce a product, to produce a commodity, and to exist really for no other purpose than to produce that commodity.
Concentrated production and an extensive distribution network are the key features of modern agriculture and food industry. Therefore, when the cattle in one farm become problematic, their meat may be minced and mixed with the meat of thousands of other cattle and transported thousands of miles away. The problem gets magnified and hard to trace back to the origin. Fresh produce is the same. California is the biggest vegetable producer in the U.S., and it provides 74% of the nation's fresh crops. California invented packed and pre-washed vegetables, which are distributed by fleets to supermarkets nationwide. When people enjoy the unprecedented comfort and convenience, eat whatever they want in any season, their health may be endangered by problems which originate in just one or perhaps a handful of farms. Have scientists found a way to reduce or even eliminate the shedding and colonization of E. coli 0157H7 in cattle?
Okay, simply put, we don't have a magic bullet to solve the problem today. We have several methods available to us to begin to work. There are probiotics, which are mixtures of good bacteria, gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria, that are not harmful to people or animals that we can feed to cattle that help reduce the 0157H7 in the animals. We can also use some certain feedstuffs such as orange peels or a seaweed product that also reduces salmonella and E. coli 0157 in cattle. Some other research that's going on is investigating the role of melatonin and day length in shedding of E. coli 0157H7. Additionally, the bacteriophage, which are viruses that naturally kill E. coli 0157H7 in the environment, have been isolated, and we found that we can add them back to cattle and reduce the 0157H7 population. But the one that we're most excited about is a product that we have that is getting very close to market through the FDA process called sodium chlorate. And what sodium chlorate does is it simply is a toxin to bacteria. The bacteria take the chlorate up and change its structure to something that will kill them. And in this way they kill themselves, but it does not hurt other bacteria and it's not toxic to the animal. So this way we can use the bacteria's own metabolic processes against it as a way to reduce the pathogen in the animal. And one of the other more promising methods that's come to light in recent years is the development of a vaccine that has been fairly successful in Canada, and trials in the U.S. have looked very good so far. But again, that is not on the market quite yet, but it will be very shortly.
That sounds fantastic. People really hope that these new technologies can produce the predicted results. However, like any newly invented technique, without long-term and widespread utilization, it is very hard to thoroughly understand its effects and side effects. Mad cow disease is one example where technology nearly brought disaster to humankind.
Tracking mad cow disease. Mad cow. Right here in the United States.
Well, one of the practices that industrialized agribusiness has become notorious for is the feeding of animals back to other animals, especially vegetarian animals back to other vegetarian animals, and that is why we have mad cow disease.
Mad cow disease is officially called bovine spongiform encephalopathy, or BSE in animal science. It was first found in Britain in April 1985. The infectious agent in BSE is believed to be an abnormal protein called prion in the brain, and it can cause deterioration of the brain.
By 1985, the British knew they had a problem. They were beginning to see cows dying in a specific way that cows had never died before. And over about 3 years' time, they found out that this was something that was happening in the brain of the cow that caused it to get spongy. The brain looks like a sponge.
In modern industrial cattle farming, meat and bone meal produced from the processed leftovers of the slaughtered animals was widely used as a protein supplement in cattle feed in Europe prior to 1987. Therefore, diseased dead animals entered into cattle feed and resulted in the widespread of the abnormal prion in cattle and its entering into the human food chain.
They were able to determine that the prion, as it's called, that causes this was very heat resistant, so the process of rendering dead animals to get the fat out leaves a residue that was used in animal feeds, and although rendering uses quite high temperatures, why the prions were still infectious in the rendered material, and when they were put in animal feeds, cows got infected. And it takes 2 or 3 years for them to get sick, so it wasn't obvious that they ate this and immediately they had that disease. Clearly, where BSE is concerned, this was a result of feeding practices. And the best available information was that this was not a risky process, and then unfortunately we found that it was.
Up until 2004, more than 180,000 cases of BSE in cattle have been confirmed in Britain. 157 people acquired and died of a disease called variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, or VCJD, the human form of mad cow disease.
The modern lifestyle is driven by interest and desire. Not much consideration is given to its effect on the ecosystem, with little respect to the natural law. So various new fancy way of production was invented. People enjoy the abundance of material wealth and comfort like never before. However, when the balance in nature was broken, unforeseen problems arise. How can we deal with this? All kinds of temporary or immediate solutions were provided with the help of modern technology. But will this new technology create a new problem? Nobody knows. So, we all know, human intelligence can never catch up with the change in nature. If we can reconsider our relationship with the nature, if we can think about how can we live with it in harmony instead of trying to conquer it, perhaps a totally different path will be opened up for us.
Lee Reinhardt and the organization he is affiliated with, the National Center for Appropriate Technology, is promoting the concept of sustainable agriculture.
We want to look at an agriculture and develop an agricultural system that is self-sustaining, that relies on as few off-farm, off-system inputs as possible.
Lee mentioned that traditional agriculture is a pretty sustainable system.
Beef cattle production prior to the industrialization of agriculture was more a part of diversified farms. And what you would see is a smaller farm, anywhere from 100 to 500 acres actually, that would have cattle integrated with cropping systems, with vegetables, with grains, with hay, lots of pasture, chickens, hogs. Essentially, it was a farming system that supported that family. It was almost subsistence agriculture. And then whatever was produced in surplus was sold or bartered or traded throughout the community. But we're not reverting. So I think what we're looking at now in sustainable agriculture is kind of taking what we know from history and what we know as the established principles of biological agriculture, and coupling them with what we've learned with appropriate technology use, and coming up with a new kind of agriculture, one that's never been around before.
So do you think if the sustainable agriculture becomes the mainstream, are there going to be enough product for the whole society?
Right. Yes. The bottom line is yes. I believe that they can. What that would mean is that there would be more farmers. We're looking at, what did I say earlier, 1.5% of the population, at least in the United States, are farmers. Much more in some of our other countries in the world, especially some of the southern countries. But what it would mean to us if we went back to a more sustainable, local-based agriculture is that it would drastically change what our landscape looked like and how we use landscape and how we valued it. We would value land not for its bottom line on selling it as a commodity to put a house on or something, or to turn into a strip mall, but we would look at it as an ecosystem that we would enter into a relationship with, that we would feed and that would feed us, if that makes any sense. So what you would see is you'd see a lot more farms, a lot more working lands, a lot less idle land, more people on the ground actually tilling it, producing food, and selling it on a more regional scale, as opposed to shipping further.
However, not everybody agrees with this idea.
But I see a lot of people who wish that we could make old times come back. My father was born on a farm, and he said that what he wanted me to know was that you could starve more slowly on a farm than anywhere else. And he didn't think that living on a farm was very glamorous. It was just hard work and very little rest.
The problem is that if we don't find a way to deal with our energy problem within the next 100 years, it's going to be out of our... That's not going to be the right question to ask, is do we want to, but we have to. How are we going to? Do you see? Many people will say, we can't keep going the way we're going right now because the Earth's carrying capacity just won't let it happen. We don't have enough fossil fuels to allow us to do this. Even if we grew all of our own biofuels, it wouldn't produce near enough of the fuels to fuel our fleets as we have now that rely on fossil fuels. So many people will say, regardless of what we want, we're going to have to change someday. And so more and more people are saying, okay, if that's the case, if we're going to have to change the way we eat and the way we produce food, then let's start thinking about that.
Our program started with discussions of E. coli 0157H7 outbreaks. But as we explored deeper, we found that the problem is not just a simple problem of food contamination. The repeated outbreaks are closely linked to how the agriculture and food industries operate in this modern world. In the past 5 decades, this efficiency-oriented food industry has brought us food products that are so abundant, so cheap, so convenient, and so diversified that it has dramatically changed our way of living. When we all take these benefits for granted, we're losing the courage to fundamentally question whether we, humankind, have unilaterally broken our harmony with nature. Until now, we have not found a satisfactory solution to prevent E. coli 0157H7 from contaminating our food again. In fact, whether a satisfactory solution exists is still an arguable issue in the context of the modern food industry. However, at least one thing is clear. It is almost impossible for the modern food industry to alter its current path if we consumers do not want it to change. Zooming in, this is Anna Chan. See you next time.